This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and as you can tell, we're in a very unique setting here. This actually is one of our remote editions of This Week in the Boardroom, and we are in Seattle, and we are at the NERI annual conference, and you can't see it, but we are looking over tables that seat about 1,100 members of NERI. And that's what makes this show so special this week, is that we're actually doing this show from the conference. And joining me to talk about the great issue of shareholder communications is Jane Okun Bomba, who's the SVP, Chief Sustainability, Investor Relations, and Communications Officer for IHS. So with that title, I think we better first explain a little bit of what you do and a little bit about what IHS is for our audience.
Great. Well, thanks, TK, and great to be here today, especially at this conference. Just a little bit about IHS for starters. IHS is an information services company. We're a B2B company that helps combine a lot of data and information with research and analytics. We sell into industries that have very high levels of capital and operating spending, and so they use our products and services to help leverage those decisions and make those decisions in a more efficient way. It's a great place to be in investor relations because we have a beautiful business model, which is characterized by an annual subscription business and very high levels of cash flow. So it's an investor's dream because it's a relatively predictable business and selling into very high potential markets.
Is it a challenge at all to also be dipping in the sustainability? And the communications make sense because that seems like a logical part of IRO.
Not at all, I don't think. I really see my job as being the Chief Corporate Positioning Officer for IHS. And so in that regard, I'm constantly thinking about perceptions of both internal and external audiences and what we can do to affect those perceptions. So investor relations touches, obviously, the investment community. I also help to lead internal and external communications, which helps our employees and helps media and governments and the communities that we live in. And corporate sustainability is becoming a very hot topic and a hot issue for companies, both from a community standpoint, but also from an investor standpoint. So I just got back from a week of marketing in Europe. And it was interesting because I've done this trip on an annual basis for 5 or 6 years. What I found this time was, I would say, over half of my meetings, the issue of sustainability and socially responsible investing came up, and we've been doing a lot of follow-up in that regard. So I actually think that investor relations and corporate sustainability fit very nicely together.
Well, we'll have to watch for that moving forward because it seems like sustainability raises and then 2008 and 9 comes along and it sort of gets pushed back for survival purposes, and now it seems to be emerging again. But you're probably right that they all have to tie together very well. So let me talk about shareholder communications, because this show has dubbed 2012 as the year for shareholder communications. No surprise with Say on Pay and the other shareholder proposals that have been presented and the need to know who your shareholders are. So talk to us a little bit about what changes you had to make to be more communicative with the shareholders in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't think we've made any drastic changes. Rather, it's been an evolution that has built on best practice. So we had the luxury of establishing an investor relations function when IHS went public back at the end of 2005. So we built a foundation of an investor relations practice that really was built on the best ideas and the best practices in place. But things have changed over the last 5 or 6 years, and as they have, we have evolved with it. A great example of that is for the past 2 or 3 years, we've done an informal roadshow to educate around proxy proposal issues. As there's been increased focus on proposals and greater say for shareholders, we found it was to our benefit to start very early in the year, several months before the annual meeting itself, to get out and take the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with shareholders about what proposals were on the ballot for the coming year and why we felt that they were necessary to help drive the business the way we had. About 2 years ago, we actually had a proposal on our proxy that was a little more controversial. And at the end of the day, and after this informal roadshow and lots of follow-up discussion, we actually did modify that proposal slightly before we went to the annual meeting, based on the feedback that we got from shareholders.
And have you found that bringing the board along with that, and again, having the advantage of starting with them, has made it maybe a little easier for you than sort of if it was an abrupt change where all of a sudden the board had to refocus on shareholder communications?
Yeah, you know, IHS is very blessed to have an incredible board, a very senior and experienced board, but also a board that has a very keen appreciation for the investor relations function. And so there hasn't been too much coercing to get them to come along with us. It's a board that is very interested in providing high levels of transparency and doing the right thing and having happy shareholders. So I think I would characterize it as being very supportive. They've been incredibly supportive of us.
Have you found the board to be more sensitive recently with the idea that shareholders can now withhold votes, and you know, we have proxy 452 and it's a lot easier to impact? Do you see that sensitivity with your board of directors?
I wouldn't say that there's a sensitivity. I think they recognize it also as an opportunity for us to engage more productively with our shareholder base, because I think the shareholders having a say really provides the structure to move forward and have those conversations. So I don't think it's been a big sea change for our board.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about being here, we have 1,100 of your peers, so, but as you have gone around and talked with them and sat in meetings and had discussions, what from the IRO's perspective seems to come up where investor relations people wish the board was either more focused or would pay more attention to? What can we say to our audience that sort of you've collected from your experiences so far that might be helpful for them to hear about how IROs feel?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, as always, and I would say this both with a board and with corporate executive teams vis-a-vis the investor relations function, is to just have higher levels of engagement. I think IR professionals, and certainly a lot of the people I've spoken with here thus far, are just keen to engage more with executive management and with the board so that they can help facilitate the company's success in a better way, that they can understand the needs of the board and how an investor relations professional can be more helpful in supporting the board to execute its function.
When I was running a public company, it was always a challenge. Everybody wanted more time on the board, you know, whether it was audit, whether it was sustainability, whether it was investor relations, the corporate secretary. That is a challenge. I would say what's working in IRO's favor these days, though, is this has really turned into the main topic or a big issue. So I think that is going to garner more time just by the importance of all the issues.
Right, I totally agree with you. And again, back to that structure of the proxy and much higher levels of visibility and requirement forces those conversations to be had between the investor relations professional, who is the person with the keenest sense of the perspective of the financial community and is in the best position to feed that capital markets view back to the board.
Yeah, we heard that a lot today in the sessions, and those CFOs and those CEOs value the fact that there is a team of people that can pass along sort of the overview of that, regardless of whether it's good or bad, the overview, so that a CEO or a CFO can absorb that much quicker than if they had to sort of go out and grasp that on their own.
Right.
So let me ask you, you have a role here at the conference. You're going to be doing the board session. You're going to be moderating the board session. So share with our audience what the sort of the topic will be here at the Investor Relations Conference on board issues.
Well, I want to keep some suspense here and not give it all away, but again, back to what I said previously, I think investor relations professionals are so hungry for that perspective of the board because it really will help each of them do their jobs more effectively. So we'll spend time getting some of that perspective from the board, even on some of the issues that you've raised today around shareholder communication and how companies are doing with shareholder communication, how much information the board wants about that proxy and how best to handle proxy process. We might touch on activist shareholders and how the board thinks about that. A fifth conference call perhaps, and does the board want to be more engaged in shareholder relations, shareholder communication, and what their perspective is about how exposed they should be directly to the investor base of a company. So I think it should be a great session, and we've got a great group of board members coming in to be panelists.
All issues that we have affectionately covered on this show, so hopefully you'll be able to pass along that to the IR audience as well. And Jane, that sort of eats up our time, but I wanted to thank you for joining us here on This Week in the Boardroom. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine, and thanks for the opportunity.
And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. Please join us next week, where we'll take another look at a key topic that will help you be a better board member or committee member. We'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.